The rain had only just stopped, leaving the streets of the city slick and gleaming under the dull afternoon sky. Vendors were dragging tarpaulins back over their stalls, brushing water off crates of fruit. Commuters hurried past with umbrellas dripping, too busy to notice the thin, stooped man sweeping in front of a little provisions shop. That man was Caleb. His clothes were torn and stiff with old dirt, his beard graying, his shoes nothing more than flattened soles tied with string. For sweeping away leaves and water from the shop's doorway, the owner had promised him leftover bread. He worked silently, shoulders bent, moving as though the broom were the only anchor keeping him upright in the world. When he finished, Caleb leaned the broom against the wall and sank to the curb. His bones ached. He rubbed his hands together for warmth. A few coins clinked in a rusty tin beside him, his daily hope for survival. He closed his eyes, listening to the distant hum of traffic, when a sudden commotion snapped him alert. Across the street, a woman staggered. She clutched her chest, her face pale, her steps uneven. People turned their heads, slowed, and then walked on. A few glanced, then chose not to get involved. Caleb's heart clenched. He pushed himself up, joints screaming. Without thinking, he hurried toward her. "Ma'am. Are you all right?" His voice was rough, unused. The woman's knees buckled. She crumpled onto the wet pavement, her handbag spilling open, papers scattering across the sidewalk. Caleb lunged forward, catching her head before it struck the ground. "Stay with me," he muttered, shaking her lightly. Her breathing was shallow. He brushed damp hair from her face. Even through grime-streaked eyes, he noticed something, a delicate gold chain around her neck, its pendant an unusual crest. Caleb froze. He had seen that emblem before, long ago, back when he worked as a clerk in a mansion before life betrayed him. But there was no time to dwell. He pulled her bag close, searching. No medicine. No phone. Nothing useful. People hurried past, eyes sliding over the scene. To them, it was just a beggar with another vagrant. "Somebody help!" Caleb shouted, voice breaking. No one stopped. Gritting his teeth, he hooked his arms under the woman's frail body and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, and his muscles strained, but he carried her toward the shop's covered stoop. He laid her down gently against the wall, shielding her from the chill breeze. Her lips parted, a faint whisper escaping. Caleb leaned close, his ear nearly brushing hers. "Why, help me," she breathed, barely audible. "Because no one else will," Caleb answered simply. Her eyelids fluttered. She tried to focus on his face, confusion shadowing her features. To her, he was just a filthy stranger, a man society pretended not to see. Yet his hands were steady, his gaze filled not with judgment but with concern. "Rest," he said softly. "You're safe now." From the corner of his eye, Caleb saw the pendant again, glinting faintly in the dim light. Something deep in his memory stirred, a world away from the gutter he now lived in. But before he could place it, the woman's hand twitched, clutching at his sleeve. "Don't let them find me," she murmured. Her head fell back, unconscious. Caleb stared, stunned by her words. Who was chasing her? What kind of woman wore jewelry from the elite yet collapsed in the streets with no one to claim her? The tin of coins lay forgotten behind him. The loaf of bread he had earned that morning was forgotten too. All Caleb could see was this mysterious woman. A stranger who had fallen into his arms, unaware that the man who saved her was a homeless outcast, and unaware that her own secret was far greater than either of them yet realized. The night was long for Caleb. He sat near the woman he had rescued, watching her shallow breathing, waiting for any sign of movement. He had propped her carefully under the shop's awning, wrapping his only ragged jacket around her shoulders. The streets grew quiet. Neon signs flickered against puddles on the road. But Caleb's mind was elsewhere. Every time he looked at the necklace on her chest, memories clawed at him, memories he tried hard to bury. Years ago, Caleb had not been a beggar. He was a man with purpose, with dignity. He worked as a foreman in a textile factory. His hands were strong, his posture proud, his clothes always neat. He had a wife, Lydia, who clung to his arm with laughter in her eyes. They had planned a future together, dreaming of a little house outside the city, of children who would carry Caleb's name. But life had its cruel humor. One rainy evening, while supervising workers on the factory floor, an accident struck. A machine belt snapped. In the scramble, Caleb was hit, his leg crushed under falling metal. The screams of the men echoed, and when he woke in the hospital, his world had shifted. His leg was broken badly, his mobility gone for months. At first, Lydia stayed by his side. She held his hand, whispered promises that everything would be fine. But soon, her patience thinned. The bills piled up, the factory owner cut his pay, and Caleb's savings drained away. "Caleb," she whispered one night, thinking he slept. "I didn't marry you to spend my youth tied to a cripple." His heart cracked in the darkness, but he kept silent, pretending he hadn't heard. Weeks later, the silence was broken when he returned home from therapy on crutches and found Lydia packing. A man waited by the door, wealthy, well-dressed, smirking. Caleb's blood froze. "Lydia, what's going on?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. She zipped the suitcase, her face twisted with a mix of guilt and defiance. "I can't do this anymore," she snapped. You're nothing now, Caleb. He can give me the life you can't." Caleb staggered forward. "I gave you everything I had." "Not enough," she shouted. "And it never will be." The other man stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. "Move on, Caleb. She deserves better." Caleb's knees buckled. The suitcase wheels rattled against the floor as Lydia brushed past him, leaving the house without looking back. That was the last time Caleb ever saw her. After that, everything unraveled. He lost the house, the job, the life he had built. Friends who once praised him melted away. The world became smaller and colder. Nights on the street taught him to swallow pride. Days of hunger taught him to beg. The man who once led workers with authority now lived on scraps, invisible to those who once shook his hand. And yet, he never stopped helping others. When he saw a child shivering, he shared his blanket. When a vendor offered leftovers, he always gave the first bite to another beggar before himself. The world had stripped him of status, but not of compassion. Now, staring at the unconscious woman he had saved, Caleb felt the sting of those memories. He touched the scar running down his leg, a reminder of everything he had lost. "Everyone leaves when you're weak," he muttered under his breath. "Everyone." But as the woman stirred faintly beside him, clutching at that mysterious necklace, something new sparked inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The woman Caleb had rescued lay weak under the awning, her breathing shallow but steady. Dawn crept slowly into the city, turning the wet streets gold. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat near her, his back against the cold wall, fighting off the ache in his stomach. When her eyes fluttered open, Caleb leaned closer. "You're awake," he said gently. Vivian blinked, her vision clearing. She saw him, ragged, hollow-cheeked, his eyes full of worry. For a moment, shame crossed her face. "Why would a man with nothing risk himself for me?" she thought. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Rest," Caleb whispered. "Don't strain yourself." She nodded faintly, but inside her mind, storm clouds churned. Vivian Hart was no ordinary woman. She was the hidden heiress of the Hart conglomerate, an empire of shipping, hotels, and real estate. But few knew the truth. To the public, her husband, Richard, wore the crown. He basked in attention, smiled for cameras, and played the role of powerful magnate. Behind closed doors, he was different. Flashback. Vivian sat at a mahogany dining table, her hands folded tightly. Richard swirled his wine, smirking across the candlelight. "You really think you matter here, Viv?" His voice dripped with contempt. "You're just decoration. A signature on paper." Her jaw tightened. "It's my father's inheritance that built this, Richard. You wouldn't have a single board seat if... If what?" He cut her off, his smile cruel. "If you weren't so pathetic. You think your old man left this empire for you? He left it for me to manage, because you're too weak." Vivian's chest burned, but she stayed silent. Another night, another betrayal. She had risen to fetch water when she heard whispers down the hallway. The bedroom door was cracked. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. Inside, Richard was on the phone, with his mistress. "Don't worry, darling," he whispered. "Her days are numbered. Once she's gone, everything will be ours. The board will listen to me then. She's too frail to last much longer." The mistress laughed on the other end. "And her money, every penny. You'll inherit it all." Vivian's knees weakened. She pressed her hand against the wall, forcing herself not to cry out. Her days were numbered. Her inheritance, the empire her father had entrusted to her, was being plotted over like a stolen jewel. Back under the awning, Vivian clenched her fists weakly in her lap, lost in the memory. She had grown used to betrayal, to silence. But for the first time in years, a stranger had treated her with dignity. A homeless man, no less. Caleb shifted beside her, rubbing warmth into his arms. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't pry. He simply waited, guarding her like a soldier who owed her nothing. Vivian studied his face. The world had mocked her, belittled her, and tried to erase her. But here was someone who, with nothing to his name, had lifted her when she was about to fall. And for the first time in years, Vivian's heart felt seen. The morning air was fresh after the rain, the city's noise just beginning to rise. Caleb sat on the curb outside the same provisions shop, sipping weak tea the owner had given him. His thoughts kept circling back to the woman he had rescued. She had left at dawn without a word, her frail body wrapped in his old jacket, which she tried to return. Caleb refused, shaking his head. "You'll need it more than me," he said simply. Now, as he stared into the steam of his cup, he spotted her again. This time, she was in plain clothes, an oversized sweater and scarf, her hair pulled tight under a hood. She moved cautiously, as if she didn't want to be recognized. At first, he thought he was mistaken. But then he saw the necklace glint faintly at her throat. It was her. She stood near a small playground where children chased each other, their laughter ringing against the morning light. A boy pointed upward. His kite had flown into the branches of a large tree. The children called for help, their voices high with panic. The woman, Vivian, looked around. No one stepped forward. Parents were busy on their phones. Passers-by ignored the children. And then Vivian did something that stunned Caleb. She began climbing the tree. Her hands gripped the rough bark. Her body trembled with each step upward. Her shoes slipped on damp branches, and her breath came fast. Caleb saw her knuckles whiten, her jaw set in determination. "Ma'am." Caleb called, rising quickly. "What are you doing?" The children cheered. "She's getting it. She's getting it." But Caleb's heart raced. He could see the strain in her arms, the weakness in her legs. Her body was not strong enough for this. "Come down before you fall," he shouted, moving toward the base of the tree. Vivian ignored him. Her eyes were locked on the kite tangled high above, as if reaching it meant more than just saving a toy. Each movement was a battle. Sweat beaded at her temples despite the cool breeze. Finally, her foot slipped. She gasped, her body jerking sideways. Caleb darted forward, stretching his arms upward. "I've got you," he cried. Her fingers clutched at the branch, slipping. With one final desperate push, she freed the kite and tossed it downward. The children screamed in delight. But Vivian lost her balance, tumbling against the trunk. Caleb caught her as she fell into his arms. His knees buckled from her weight, but he held firm. "What were you thinking?" His voice shook with fear and anger. Vivian panted, her chest heaving. She tried to stand, but Caleb kept a steadying grip on her arms. The child needed it, she whispered. No one else would help. Caleb stared at her. For a moment, he saw himself, years ago, before the betrayal, when he too believed it was his duty to help others, no matter the cost. "You'll kill yourself acting like this," he said. Vivian looked away, her eyes shimmering with something he couldn't place, defiance, pain, maybe both. Caleb eased her down to the bench. The children ran to her, thanking her, tugging at the kite. She smiled weakly at them, her disguise slipping for a heartbeat, revealing the grace of someone who had once lived above the clouds of ordinary life. As Caleb watched, a single thought struck him: this woman is running from something. And whatever it is, it's eating her alive. The evening air was heavy, the kind that pressed against the skin and carried whispers farther than intended. Vivian walked with her hood pulled low, moving quietly through the city. Her chest still ached from the tree climb earlier, but her mind weighed heavier than her body. She had followed Richard before, her instincts gnawing at her like a wound that wouldn't heal. Tonight, her feet carried her again, unwilling, yet compelled. She told herself it was paranoia. Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe he's just busy. But deep down, she already knew. Outside the glass doors of a grand hotel, Vivian froze. A sleek black car pulled up. Richard stepped out, adjusting his tie. His hand reached back, and another figure emerged. Vivian's breath caught. It was Clara, her closest friend since childhood. The woman who had stood by her side through school, through her father's funeral, through her wedding day. Vivian's fingers tightened around the edge of her hood. She pressed herself against the building's cold stone, her heart pounding so hard she thought the whole street could hear it. Inside, the pair checked in like husband and wife. Richard's hand lingered on Clara's waist, his smile one Vivian hadn't seen in years. They disappeared into the elevator, leaving Vivian's world spinning. Hours later. Vivian moved like a shadow through the hotel corridors. Her hood was gone, replaced with a maid's abandoned cart she had borrowed in desperation. The hallway carpet muffled her steps. She stopped outside a half-open door. Voices drifted through. Richard's laugh. Clara's giggle. Vivian's chest tightened. She edged closer, her hands trembling. "I told you," Clara's voice purred. "She's weak. She'll break soon. And when she's gone, it's all ours." Richard's voice followed, low and cruel. "The board already sees her as fragile. Once she slips, I'll control every penny of her inheritance." Vivian bit her lip, stifling a cry. Then Clara's words cut like a blade. "And don't forget about this." Vivian peered through the crack. Clara was leaning against Richard, her hand on her belly. Richard chuckled darkly. "My child. Not hers." Imagine the look on her face if she ever knew. Vivian's knees nearly buckled. She staggered back, her body shaking violently. The betrayal was complete, not only her husband, but her best friend, carrying his child. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself silent. No outburst. No confrontation. She pressed a fist to her lips, swallowing the scream clawing at her throat. Her heart was shattering, but her mind was already plotting. Down the corridor, Caleb happened to be sweeping the lobby floors. He looked up just in time to see Vivian rush out of the elevator, her face pale, her eyes hollow with shock. She didn't see him. She disappeared into the night like a hunted bird. Caleb frowned, gripping the broom tighter. He didn't know what had happened upstairs, but he knew pain when he saw it. He knew betrayal's shadow, he had lived it. And he swore silently, whoever did that to her, may they never rest easy. The night after witnessing Richard's betrayal, Vivian sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Her body trembled, but no tears came. She had cried enough over the years, cried until her soul felt dry. Now, there was only silence. She didn't storm into the hotel. She didn't scream or confront. She simply drove away, her headlights cutting through the wet streets, her hood pulled low. To anyone watching, she looked broken. Defeated. A wife too weak to fight. But inside, a fire sparked. Back at her penthouse, she moved like a ghost through the gilded rooms. Chandeliers glimmered overhead, mocking her. Every corner reminded her of Richard's presence, his cigars on the counter, his shoes tossed carelessly at the door, his laughter echoing in memory. Vivian paused at the dining table where he had once sneered, "You're just decoration." She traced her fingers over the polished wood, her eyes hard. Then, without a word, she walked to her study. She unlocked a hidden drawer behind rows of leather-bound books. Inside were files her father had left her, deeds, share certificates, sealed letters. Documents the world thought Richard controlled. Vivian stacked them neatly, her mind sharp. She had never wanted war. But they had pushed her too far. Days turned to weeks. To the public, Vivian had vanished. She stopped attending galas. She ignored calls. Even her staff whispered she was crumbling, too frail to carry on. Richard and Clara celebrated openly, parading their affair with smug confidence. They believed Vivian's silence was surrender. But Caleb saw her differently. He noticed her at the edge of the park sometimes, sitting on a bench in plain clothes. She fed crumbs to birds, her face unreadable. She never complained, never explained, but there was steel in her eyes. Caleb, from his place on the curb, recognized it, the look of someone who had been broken and rebuilt themselves in silence. He wanted to ask who she was, what burden she carried. But instead, he sat nearby, close enough that she could feel his presence if she wanted it. He knew what silence meant, he knew how sometimes, silence was louder than screams. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Vivian finally spoke to him. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that people mistake silence for weakness?" Caleb turned his head, studying her. His voice was rough but steady. "Every day." Vivian's lips twitched into a bitter smile. "Good." She stood, gathering her papers close to her chest. "Then they'll never see me coming." She walked away, her steps slow but certain, leaving Caleb staring after her with a strange mix of admiration and concern. He didn't know what battle she was preparing for. But he felt it in his bones, when it came, it would shake everything. The grand hall was packed, marble floors polished so bright they mirrored the chandeliers above. Rows of men in expensive suits murmured, their voices sharp with gossip. At the front, Richard sat tall beside Clara, smugness written all over their faces. Their lawyers shuffled papers confidently. Word had spread that Vivian Hart was finished. Too weak to fight. Too fragile to lead. This, they believed, was the day she would be stripped of everything her father left behind. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled. Documents were presented, claims that Vivian had mismanaged her inheritance, that she was unfit to run Hart Industries, that control should shift to her husband. Richard adjusted his tie, glancing at Clara with a satisfied grin. Then the doors opened. The room fell silent as Vivian entered. She no longer wore the frail disguise, no hood, no plain sweater. She walked with quiet authority, her steps measured, her chin high. Her suit was sharp, tailored in deep navy, and around her neck gleamed the same gold pendant Caleb had noticed the night he saved her. Murmurs rippled. She doesn't look weak. What is she doing here? Richard's smile faltered. What game is this? He hissed under his breath. Vivian approached the bench, her presence commanding. Your Honor, she said calmly, her voice steady, before any judgment is passed, I ask that the court review these. She signaled. 2 aides entered, wheeling in boxes of documents sealed with her father's crest. Vivian lifted a folder and laid it before the judge. These are the original deeds, trusts, and shareholder agreements of Hart Industries. They were placed in my name, not my husband's. My father made me sole beneficiary, with explicit instructions that I alone hold majority control. For years, I allowed my husband to present himself as the face of the empire. But make no mistake, he was only ever a guest in my inheritance. Gasps swept through the courtroom. Richard leapt to his feet. Lies. She's making this up. The judge flipped through the documents, eyes narrowing. These appear authentic. Signatures are valid. Witnesses are recorded. Vivian turned, her gaze sharp as steel. You called me worthless. You plotted to erase me. You thought my silence was weakness. But silence, Richard, she leaned forward, her voice cold. Was strategy. Clara shrank in her chair, clutching her stomach as whispers spread through the gallery. Richard's face drained of color. His hands trembled as the judge banged the gavel. Effective immediately, full control of Hart Industries remains with Mrs. Vivian Hart. All motions filed by Mr. Richard Hart are denied. Furthermore, evidence of conspiracy to defraud will be reviewed by the district attorney. The courtroom erupted. Some applauded. Others whispered feverishly. Richard collapsed back into his chair, stunned, broken. Clara's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Vivian straightened her jacket, her face calm, regal. She had not only defended her inheritance, she had destroyed their arrogance. And at the back of the courtroom, unnoticed by all but her, Caleb stood in the shadows. He had come at her quiet invitation, unsure why. Now, as their eyes met across the room, he understood. This wasn't just her victory. It was proof that those who endure in silence can rise louder than thunder. The courtroom still buzzed with whispers when the judge adjourned, but Vivian remained seated. Her hands rested calmly on the table as reporters crowded the hallways outside, shouting her name. Richard slumped beside Clara, his tie loosened, his face ashen. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single hour. Vivian rose, smoothing her jacket. We're not finished, she said coldly. Her voice cut through the room like glass. Richard's head snapped up. What more could you possibly? She held up a small recorder. With a nod, her lawyer pressed play. Richard's voice spilled into the courtroom, low and venomous. Her days are numbered. Once she's gone, every penny will be ours. She's too weak to last much longer. Gasps erupted. Clara paled, clutching her belly as her own laughter echoed from the recording. The judge banged his gavel. This evidence will be forwarded to the district attorney. Charges of conspiracy and fraud are now under review. Richard buried his face in his hands. Clara stood abruptly, trying to flee, but reporters swarmed the corridor. Vivian turned away from them both, her expression calm. Justice had been served. Later that week, in the quiet warmth of her private estate, Vivian sat in a sunlit room. Across from her, Caleb shifted uncomfortably in a clean set of clothes, not new, but respectable, a far cry from the rags he had worn the day he saved her. You didn't have to bring me here, he muttered, his rough voice uncertain. Vivian studied him. I didn't have to. I wanted to. You saved my life when no one else would. You gave me dignity when I had none. Now it's my turn. The door creaked open, and 2 children entered, twins, no older than 5. Their steps were hesitant, their eyes wide with the shyness of children who had known too much sadness. They moved to Vivian's side, clinging to her hand. "These are my children," she said softly. "They haven't spoken since my father died. Trauma silenced them." Caleb's chest tightened. He knelt, lowering himself to their height. "Hello there," he said gently, his voice carrying the warmth he rarely showed. "My name's Caleb." For a moment, silence lingered. Then one of the twins reached out, touching his scarred hand. The other leaned closer, whispering, "Caleb." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. It was the first word they had spoken in over a year. Caleb swallowed hard, overcome. He patted their small hands carefully, afraid his roughness would scare them. Instead, the twins clung tighter, as if they had found the protector they had been waiting for. Vivian smiled through her tears. "They've chosen you." Caleb looked up at her, confused. "Chosen me? For what?" "To stay," she whispered. "To protect them. To be part of this family." The homeless man who had once been invisible felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was needed. He was seen. And as Vivian watched the man society had called worthless kneel before her children like a guardian, she knew her father had been right, wealth meant nothing without heart. And this man had more heart than anyone she had ever known. The garden behind Vivian's estate glowed in the late afternoon sun. Birds skimmed low across the fountain, and the laughter of children drifted through the air. Caleb sat on a wooden bench, the twins perched beside him, one on each side. Their small hands clutched his sleeves as if letting go might make him vanish. Vivian stood a few paces away, watching. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe freely. The mask of strength she wore in boardrooms, in courts, in the face of betrayal, it slipped here. Here, she was simply a mother, and a woman grateful to still be alive. Caleb caught her gaze. He looked out of place in the fine garden, his hands scarred, his posture still carrying the weight of the streets. But when the twins tugged his beard and giggled, he smiled, and for a moment he seemed like he belonged more than anyone. Vivian walked over slowly. "They've never trusted anyone this quickly," she said, her voice gentle. Caleb shook his head. "They deserve better than me." Vivian lowered herself to the bench beside him, her eyes steady. "No. They deserve exactly you. A man who stood in the mud yet never let his heart turn cold. A man who had nothing, yet gave everything." Caleb looked down, humbled. "I only did what anyone should." "But no one else did," she replied firmly. "That's the difference." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The children's laughter filled it, bright and pure. Vivian laid her hand over Caleb's. It was the first time she had touched someone without fear since her father died. "You saved me," she whispered. "Not just from that night on the street. You saved me from believing I was truly worthless." Caleb's throat tightened. He had no words, only a nod. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Vivian stood on the balcony overlooking her empire. The city lights flickered like 1,000 watchful eyes. Beside her, Caleb leaned against the railing, the twins fast asleep inside. "Funny," Caleb said softly, "how the world measures worth. By titles. By money. By what you wear." He paused, his voice rough. "But the real worth, it's here." He tapped his chest. Vivian smiled faintly. "And it can't be bought. Only proven." The wind stirred, carrying away the bitterness of their pasts. The one you despise today may be the hand that saves you tomorrow. Never measure a soul by wealth or appearance, for the richest hearts are often found in the poorest places.